An obese teenage girl gives her lunch to a lonely biker sitting in the rain. Just one small act of kindness. But by sunset, 800 roaring Hell's Angels are guarding her house. She thought she was helping a stranger. She didn't know he was a man with a past so dark, the whole town feared his name. Overnight, her quiet act turns into a storm, mocked online, hated by neighbors, and surrounded by cameras. But when those engines thunder back into town, everyone learns that kindness has power and danger no one saw coming. Now the world is watching a scared teenage girl stand against hate, loyalty, and a secret that could destroy everything she loves. What happens when the world's most feared men protect the one person who showed them grace? And how far will they go to defend the girl who reminded them they still had a soul? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fog hung thick and heavy over Fairview that Monday morning, wrapping the Kansas town in a gray blanket that matched Hazel Porter's mood. The 16-year-old pulled her oversized sweater closer, more for comfort than warmth, as she made her way down the cracked sidewalk toward Fairview High. Her worn backpack felt heavier than usual, though she knew it contained the same things it always did: textbooks, notebooks, and the carefully packed lunch her mother had prepared before heading to her early shift at the diner. The thought of her mother brought a slight smile to Hazel's face. Every morning, no matter how exhausted she was from working double shifts, Aria Porter managed to pack Hazel's lunch with the same loving attention to detail. Today's ham sandwich was wrapped in foil that crinkled softly in her backpack, and Hazel knew without looking that there would be a small note tucked inside, complete with one of her mother's favorite Bible verses. As she approached the school building, the familiar knot formed in her stomach. Groups of students clustered near the entrance, their laughter cutting through the morning mist. Hazel kept her head down, trying to make herself smaller, an impossible task for someone her size, she knew from bitter experience. "Look who's rolling in," a voice stage whispered as she passed. Snickers followed, and Hazel's cheeks burned. "Guess she ate her homework again," another voice added, launching a fresh wave of cruel laughter. Hazel quickened her pace, her eyes fixed on the ground. The words from her mother's morning pep talk echoed in her mind, a lifeline in the storm of teenage cruelty. "Baby girl," Aria had said, straightening Hazel's collar with tired but loving hands. "You keep shining that light of yours. Don't let anyone dim it. Their words can only hurt you if you give them power." Easy for her mother to say, Hazel thought, but she clung to the words anyway. They were like a shield, not strong enough to deflect the arrows of mockery completely, but enough to keep her moving forward. The morning fog had started to lift, but a light drizzle had taken its place, dotting the sidewalk with dark spots. As Hazel approached the bus stop near the school's side entrance, something caught her attention. Rather, someone. A man sat alone on the bench, his posture speaking of bone-deep weariness. His leather jacket was worn at the elbows, and his beard was wild and unkempt. But it was his eyes that made Hazel pause. They were hollow, distant, like windows into an empty room. She recognized that look. It was the same one she sometimes saw in her own reflection, on days when the weight of being different felt too heavy to bear. The man didn't move, didn't seem to notice the rain that was slowly soaking through his clothes. His motorcycle was parked nearby, a beat-up machine that had seen better days. Everything about him screamed, "Stay away," the kind of person her mother had always warned her about. Hazel's feet stopped moving of their own accord. Her hand drifted to her backpack, feeling the shape of her lunch inside. Her stomach growled in protest at what she was considering, but another look at the man's face silenced it. For a long moment she stood there, caught between fear and something else, something that felt like recognition. How many times had she sat alone, feeling invisible to the world? How many times had she wished someone would see past her appearance to the person underneath? Taking a deep breath, Hazel stepped closer to the bench. Her hands trembled slightly as she unzipped her backpack and pulled out her lunch. The foil crinkled as she approached, and the man's eyes flickered toward her, wary and uncertain. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the gentle patter of rain. "Would you like this? It's just a ham sandwich, but—" She held out the package, trying to keep her hand steady. The man stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Hazel felt her courage wavering, but she kept her arm extended, the foil-wrapped sandwich like a peace offering between them. Finally, his hand reached out, weathered with dirty fingernails, and accepted the lunch. "Thanks, kid," he said, his voice rough but gentle, like stones wrapped in velvet. Hazel nodded, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She turned and walked away, aware of the man's eyes following her, but not in the mocking way she was used to. This felt different. This felt real. The rest of the school day passed in its usual blur of whispered comments and sidelong glances, but Hazel barely noticed them. Her mind kept returning to that moment at the bus stop, to the quiet exchange that had lasted less than a minute, but somehow felt more significant than all the hours of torment she'd endured in the school hallways. That night, lying in her bed, Hazel stared at the ceiling, replaying the morning's events. She wondered if the man had found her mother's note with the Bible verse. She wondered if he'd needed those words as much as she usually did. Most of all, she wondered why that simple act of kindness had left her feeling more visible, more real than she had in years. The irony wasn't lost on her, that in giving away her lunch to a stranger, she had somehow found a piece of herself. She'd spent so long trying to shrink, to hide, to become invisible. But in that moment of reaching out, of choosing kindness over fear, she had never felt more seen. Outside her window, the rain had stopped, and the streetlight cast a soft glow through her curtains. Hazel rolled onto her side, pulling her blanket closer. For the first time in a long while, the weight of others' judgments felt a little lighter. In helping someone else feel less alone, she had somehow made her own loneliness a bit more bearable. Sleep came slowly, but it came with a peace she hadn't expected. Her last thoughts weren't of the cruel comments or the laughing faces at school, but of a quiet, "Thanks, kid," and the understanding that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could fill the biggest empty spaces in a heart. Hazel's stomach rumbled as she sat through her morning classes. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet classroom, drawing a few snickers from her classmates. She hunched lower in her seat, wrapping her oversized sweater tighter around herself, but couldn't bring herself to regret giving away her lunch. Mrs. Henderson, her English teacher, was discussing To Kill a Mockingbird, but Hazel's thoughts kept drifting back to the stranger at the bus stop. She wondered if he'd found somewhere dry to eat the sandwich, if he'd read her mother's carefully chosen Bible verse tucked inside the foil. By lunch period, the hunger pangs were sharp enough to make her wince. She sat alone at her usual corner table, sipping water and pretending to read. Jenny Martinez, a girl from her math class, glanced her way and seemed about to approach, but then thought better of it and joined her friends instead. Hazel was used to this dance by now, the almost connections that never quite happened. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. In chemistry, they were conducting experiments with Bunsen burners, and the smell of gas made her already empty stomach turn. But beneath the discomfort was a warmth that had nothing to do with food, a quiet certainty that she'd done the right thing. When the final bell rang, Hazel gathered her things slowly, in no hurry to wade through the usual surge of students rushing for freedom. She took her time walking home, enjoying the fresh air after yesterday's rain. The sky was clariang, patches of blue peeking through cotton wool clouds. As she approached her house, something caught her eye. There, on the worn wooden steps of their front porch, something metallic gleamed in the afternoon sun. Hazel quickened her pace, curiosity pushing aside her usual careful steps. It was a bracelet, not the cheap kind from the mall, but something substantial and beautiful. Chrome metal twisted into intricate patterns, catching the light like liquid silver. At its center was an eagle, wings spread wide, every feather detailed with remarkable precision. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, Hazel picked up the note. The handwriting was rough but readable. "Best sandwich I ever had. Keep that kindness burning. Tank." She was still standing there, bracelet in one hand and note in the other, when her mother's car pulled into the driveway. Aria Porter stepped out, still in her diner uniform, looking tired but managing a warm smile for her daughter. "What's that you've got there, honey?" Aria asked, climbing the porch steps. Hazel handed her the note wordlessly. She watched her mother's face as she read it, saw the flicker of concern cross her features. "Hazel," Aria began carefully, "did something happen that I should know about?" Taking a deep breath, Hazel told her about the man at the bus stop, how lonely he'd looked, how she'd given him her lunch. "I know you always say to be careful with strangers," she added quickly, "but Mom, it felt right, like something I had to do." Aria's expression softened, though worry still lingered in her eyes. "Sweetie, while I'm touched by your kindness, and clearly this tank person was too, we need to be careful. The world isn't always as good as your heart wants it to be." "I know, Mom." Hazel looked down at the bracelet, running her finger along the eagle's wings. "But sometimes it is, isn't it? Sometimes people surprise you." Later that evening, as they sat at their small kitchen table eating spaghetti, Hazel twirled her fork in the pasta, lost in thought. The bracelet lay between them, catching the overhead light. "You know what was weird?" she said suddenly. "When I gave him that sandwich, it was like God noticed me for once. Not in a big dramatic way, just in a quiet, you did good kid kind of way." She blushed, ducking her head. "That probably sounds silly." Aria reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "It doesn't sound silly at all." But behind her smile, concern flickered in her eyes. She'd spent so many years trying to protect Hazel from the world's cruelty, from the whispers and stares that her daughter pretended not to notice, but that cut deep all the same. This sudden connection with a stranger, however well-meaning, made her maternal instincts buzz with warning. They finished their dinner to the gentle backdrop of rain that had started up again, pattering against the windows like soft applause. Hazel helped with the dishes, then headed upstairs to work on her homework. In her bedroom, she placed the chrome bracelet carefully on her nightstand, right next to her father's old pocket watch, the only thing of his she had left. The eagle seemed to watch over her as she settled into bed with her chemistry textbook, its wings catching the warm light from her bedside lamp. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against her window, and for once, the house felt less empty, less lonely. Hazel didn't know it yet, but her simple act of kindness had already begun to create ripples, like a stone thrown into still water, spreading outward in ways she couldn't imagine. But for now, she simply sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by the comfort of her own small kindness and the unexpected gift it had brought in return. Wednesday dawned gray and heavy, matching the mood that would soon descend over Hazel's world. The morning started like any other. She got dressed in her favorite oversized sweater, the soft blue one that made her feel safe, and headed to school clutching another of her mom's carefully packed lunches. She didn't notice Jessica Thompson and her friends huddled near their lockers, phones out, giggling as they watched something on their screens. She didn't see the sideways glances, the pointing fingers, or the whispers that followed her down the hallway. It wasn't until third period that reality crashed down around her. "Hey, Hazel," someone called out mockingly from behind her. "Got any sandwiches for the rest of the criminals in town?" Confused, she turned to see Marcus Chen, one of the popular kids, holding up his phone. A group had gathered around him, and the sound of snickering filled the air. Her heart began to race as she caught a glimpse of the screen. There she was, in shaky cell phone footage from Monday morning, approaching the lonely biker at the bus stop. Someone had filmed the whole interaction, but that wasn't the worst part. Overlaid on the video were cruel captions. "Fat girl feeds ex-con." Looking for attention much? Wonder what else she'd give him. The blood drained from Hazel's face. Her legs felt weak, and her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She turned and walked away as quickly as she could, the laughter following her down the hallway like a cruel echo. By lunchtime, the video had spread across every social media platform in their small town. Fairview might have been a dot on the map, but news traveled fast in a place where everyone knew everyone else. Hazel sat alone in the library, her sandwich untouched, scrolling through the comments on her phone with trembling fingers. Who does she think she's fooling? Probably trying to get on some reality show. Guess she'll do anything for attention. Maybe she should keep some of that food for herself, LOL. Each comment felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The kindness she'd felt on Monday morning, that warm, gentle certainty that she'd done something good, began to crumble under the weight of cruel words and mocking emojis. Meanwhile, at the Sunrise Diner, Aria was in the middle of her shift when Beth, one of the other waitresses, approached her with a concerned look. "Aria, honey, you need to see this." Beth held out her phone, the video already playing. Aria watched, her face growing pale as she read the comments flooding in beneath the footage of her daughter's act of kindness. Without a word, she untied her apron and turned to their manager, Dave. "I have to go," she said, her voice shaking. "It's Hazel." Dave took one look at her face and nodded. "Go. We'll cover your tables." The drive home felt endless. Aria's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She'd spent years trying to protect Hazel from exactly this kind of cruelty, and now her daughter's simple act of kindness had become ammunition for bullies. When she arrived home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. "Hazel," she called out, climbing the stairs 2 at a time. "Honey, are you here?" A muffled sob from behind Hazel's closed door was her only answer. Aria tried the handle, but it was locked. "Sweetheart, please let me in." She pressed her palm against the door, as if she could somehow reach through it to comfort her daughter. "I saw what happened. You don't have to face this alone." Inside the room, Hazel sat on her bed, surrounded by crumpled tissues. Her phone lay face down beside her, still buzzing with notifications she couldn't bear to read. On her desk was her lunch bag, and inside it, the Bible verse her mother had tucked in that morning. "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." With a choked sob, Hazel grabbed the verse and crumpled it, throwing it toward her trash can. What light? What good deeds? All she'd done was try to help someone who looked lonely, and now she was being punished for it. "Mom?" Her voice cracked as she finally spoke. "Why do people have to be so mean?" The lock clicked, and Arya pushed the door open to find her daughter curled up on her bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than her 16 years. She crossed the room in 3 steps and gathered Hazel into her arms, feeling her shake with suppressed sobs. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered, stroking Hazel's hair. "The world can be so cruel to beautiful hearts like yours. But you listen to me. Those people, they're not worth your tears. They mock what they don't understand." Hazel pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "But what if they're right? What if I was just trying to get attention? Maybe I should have just walked past him like everyone else does." "No." Arya's voice was firm. "You did exactly what your heart told you was right. And let me tell you something. Love always echoes louder than hate. Always. Those mean comments, they'll fade away. But kindness? Kindness leaves marks on people's hearts that last forever." She reached over and picked up the crumpled Bible verse from where it had missed the trash can, carefully smoothing it out. "Your father used to say that the brightest lights draw the most attention, both good and bad. But that's never a reason to dim your light." Hazel nodded, weakly, letting her mother's words wash over her. She felt drained, empty, but somehow her mom's presence made the world feel a little less harsh. They sat together as the afternoon light faded, neither knowing that across town, the man she'd helped, the one they'd called an ex-con in their cruel captions, was already hey-aryang about what had happened to the kind girl who'd given him her lunch. The chrome bracelet still sat on her nightstand, its eagle wings catching the last rays of sunlight. In the growing darkness, it seemed to remind her that not all responses to kindness were cruel, that somewhere out there, someone had seen her act of compassion for what it truly was. Friday evening settled over Fairview like a heavy blanket, with gray clouds pressing low against the Kansas sky. The weathered walls of the Porter home stood quiet, save for the scratching of Hazel's pencil as she worked through her algebra homework at the kitchen table. Her mother's empty chair across from her reminded her of the double shift Arya had taken at Pete's diner to make ends meet. Hazel glanced at her phone, which had been mercifully quiet since Wednesday's video incident. Most of her classmates had moved on to newer targets for their cruelty, though the sting of their mockery still burned fresh in her mind. The chrome bracelet from Tank glinted on her nightstand upstairs, a reminder that kindness sometimes found its way back to you. The first rumble was so distant she almost missed it. It started as a low vibration, like thunder rolling in from miles away. Hazel lifted her head from her textbook, wondering if another spring storm was approaching. But this sound was different, mechanical, growing steadily louder with each passing second. The water glass beside her homework began to tremble, creating tiny ripples that caught the fading sunlight. Soon, the dishes in the cabinet started to rattle, and the windows hummed with an increasing intensity that made her heart race. This wasn't thunder. This was something else entirely. Hazel pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Her legs felt wobbly as she approached the living room window. The sound had become a deafening roar now, seeming to come from every direction at once. Drawing back the curtain with trembling fingers, she froze at the sight before her. Motorcycles. Hundreds of them. They filled her quiet residential street from end to end, their chrome pipes and polished tanks reflecting the golden sunset. Leather-clad riders sat astride their machines, faces stern beneath their helmets, patches and emblems adorning their jackets. The sea of bikes stretched as far as she could see, engines growling in unison like some great mechanical beast. At the front of this intimidating assembly stood a familiar figure. Tank Johnson had dismounted his massive black motorcycle and removed his helmet, revealing his weathered face and graying beard. His eyes, which had seemed so hollow days ago, now burned with purpose as he stood facing her house. The eagle emblem on his jacket matched the one on her bracelet upstairs. Hazel's phone buzzed frantically. Neighbors were already posting videos, calling the police, spreading the word that an army of bikers had descended on their peaceful street. Her hands shook as she opened the front door, stepping onto the porch that just days ago had held Tank's unexpected gift. Tank's voice carried across the hushed street, strong and clear. "Nobody mocks the girl who showed me grace." His words echoed off the surrounding houses, and behind him, 800 Hell's Angels revved their engines in agreement, the sound like rolling thunder. Across town at Pete's Diner, Aria was refilling coffee cups when she saw the breaking news alert on the television above the counter. Her coffee pot clattered to the floor as she watched the aerial footage of her street packed with motorcycles. Without a word to her manager, she grabbed her keys and ran for her car. The first news vans were already arriving as Hazel stood on her porch, heart pounding but chin lifted. Something was awakening inside her, a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips. It wasn't fear, though the sight before her might have terrified others. It was something else. Courage, mixed with a sense of awe that left her breathless. Tank approached the porch steps, his massive frame moving with surprising grace. "Miss Porter," he said formally, using a gentleness that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. "My brothers and I heard about what happened after you showed kindness to a stranger. We're here to show this town that no good deed goes unprotected." Behind him, the bikers had formed a protective wall around her house, their machines and bodies creating an impenetrable barrier between Hazel and the growing crowd of onlookers. News reporters jockeyed for position, their cameras capturing the extraordinary scene of 800 Hell's Angels standing guard over a 16-year-old girl's home. Aria's car screeched to a halt at the end of the block, and the sea of bikers parted to let her through. She rushed up the walkway, eyes wide with concern, but stopped short when she saw her daughter's face. Hazel wasn't cowering or crying. She stood tall, transformed by the knowledge that her simple act of kindness had awakened something powerful and unexpected in the world. "Mrs. Porter," Tank said, turning to address Aria, "your daughter's compassion touched something in me that I thought died years ago. She didn't see a scary biker or an ex-con. She just saw someone who needed kindness. My brothers and I are here to return that kindness tenfold." Reporters pressed closer, shouting questions. "Are you really Hell's Angels? Why are you protecting her? Is this about the viral video?" Tank's voice boomed out over the chaos. "This is about showing the world that kindness matters, that when you mock someone for being good, you answer to those who understand its value." He turned to face the news cameras directly. "This girl gave me her lunch when I was hungry. She gave me hope when I'd lost mine. And now we're here to give her back her dignity." The gray clouds overhead had begun to break apart, letting streams of golden sunset light pierce through. They illuminated the chrome and steel of the motorcycles, creating a gleaming fortress around the Porter home. Hazel felt tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of shame or hurt. They were tears of gratitude and amazement. Aria wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders, watching as more news vans arrived and helicopters circled overhead. The story of the girl nobody noticed was about to be noticed by everyone, not for her size or her struggles, but for the pure heart that had touched a hardened biker's soul. The 800 motorcycles continued their steadfast vigil as darkness fell, their headlights creating a ring of light around the house. Tank stationed himself at the bottom of the porch steps, a guardian angel in leather and chrome, while his brothers maintained their protective formation around the property. Hazel looked out at the extraordinary scene before her. Hundreds of tough, weathered bikers standing guard, because she'd offered a simple kindness. In that moment, she understood what her mother had meant about love echoing louder than hate. Her small act of compassion had created a ripple that grew into a wave, washing away the cruel comments and mocking videos in its wake. The chrome bracelet on her wrist caught the last rays of sunlight, its eagle wings seeming to soar with the same strength she now felt in her heart. She was no longer just the girl nobody noticed. She was the girl who proved that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to move mountains of chrome and steel and to touch hearts wrapped in leather. Dawn broke over Fairview with golden fingers of light illuminating an extraordinary sight. News vans lined both sides of Cedar Street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal sunflowers. The quiet Kansas neighborhood had transformed overnight into what looked like a media circus, complete with reporters in pressed suits clutching microphones and cameramen adjusting their equipment. Aria Porter stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup trembling in her hands as she watched the scene unfold. The bikers remained, their motorcycles forming a protective ring around her property. They'd stayed all night, taking shifts, their presence both reassuring and unsettling. "I don't like this attention," she murmured, watching another news van squeeze into a spot across the street. "What if someone tries to hurt you, Hazel?" Hazel sat at their small kitchen table, picking at her breakfast toast. The chrome bracelet on her wrist caught the morning light. "Mom, they're here to protect me. Tank promised." As if summoned by his name, Tank's massive frame appeared on their front porch. His knock was surprisingly gentle. When Aria opened the door, his expression was respectful, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Porter, I know this is overwhelming," he said, his gravelly voice softened. "But I give you my word, every man out there has been vetted by me personally. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here because your daughter showed kindness when the world showed none." Aria's shoulders relaxed slightly, but worry still creased her forehead. "There are so many cameras." "Let me handle them," Tank offered. "Your daughter's story needs to be told right." Outside, the morning air hummed with excitement. Neighbors peered from behind curtains or stood in clusters on their lawns, smartphones raised to capture the spectacle. Several of Tank's brothers were already giving interviews, their usual gruff demeanors softened as they explained their presence. "See that girl?" One biker with gray-streaked hair was saying to a reporter. "She reminded me of my own daughter. Haven't seen her in 15 years, but when I heard what this kid did, just giving away her lunch to a stranger, it hit me hard. That's the kind of person we should be protecting." Another biker, his arms covered in tattoos, spoke to a different camera crew. "We might look scary, but we know right from wrong. Those kids who mocked her kindness? That's what's wrong with the world today." Hazel finally gathered her courage and stepped outside, Aria close behind her. The cameras swiveled toward them like compass needles finding north. Tank moved protectively to Hazel's side, his presence steady and reassuring. "Miss Porter," a reporter called out, "how do you feel about having the Hells Angels as your personal security?" Before Hazel could answer, Tank spoke up. "She's not giving interviews without her mother's permission. This isn't about publicity. It's about standing up for what's right." But Hazel touched his arm gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "I want to speak." Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she addressed the cameras. "I just did what anyone should do when they see someone in need. I never expected—" She gestured at the crowd of bikers. "All this. But maybe it shows that kindness matters more than we think." Social media exploded with the footage. Within hours, Chutker Graceguard was trending nationwide. Photos of the leather-clad bikers protecting a teenage girl's house spread across the internet. But this time the comments were different. Instead of mockery, People shared stories of unexpected kindness, of judgment overcome by compassion. Mid-morning, the town council called an emergency meeting. Mayor Thompson's voice crackled over the local radio. "This gathering of motorcycle enthusiasts poses a public safety concern. We're considering measures to disperse them." But an unexpected ally emerged. Mrs. Henderson, Hazel's English teacher, stood up at the meeting, her voice carrying through the town hall. "I've taught Hazel Porter for 2 years. She's endured bullying with grace and strength. These bikers aren't the disruption. Our tolerance of cruelty is. They're teaching us a lesson we desperately need to learn." The council chambers erupted in applause. The motion to disperse the bikers was tabled indefinitely. As afternoon faded into evening, Tank gathered his brothers. "Time to head out," he announced. "We've made our point." One by one, the bikers approached Hazel to say goodbye. Many removed their patches or pins, pressing them into her hands, tokens of respect and protection. Some shared quiet words about their own daughters, sisters, or mothers. Each story was a thread connecting her simple act of kindness to a larger tapestry of human connection. "Remember," Tank said, standing at his bike, "you've got family now. 800 brothers who'll come running if you need us." He handed her a card with a phone number. Anytime, day or night. The sound of 800 motorcycles starting up made the ground tremble. They departed in formation, a river of chrome and leather flowing down Cedar Street. Neighbors came out to wave, and even the reporters seemed moved by the moment. Hazel stood on her porch until the last rumble of engines faded into the distance. The street looked strangely empty now, though a few news vans remained. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, and a peaceful quiet settled over the neighborhood. Inside, Arya had prepared a simple dinner, but Hazel was too tired to eat much. The events of the day had left her emotionally drained but filled with a deep sense of peace. As she got ready for bed, she carefully arranged the pins and patches she'd received on her dresser, next to Tank's chrome bracelet. The distant sound of motorcycles echoed faintly as she drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't threatening anymore. Instead, it felt like a lullaby of protection, a reminder that kindness, once given, has a way of returning multiplied. The days following the bikers' demonstration brought unexpected changes to the Porter household. Tank's motorcycle became a familiar sight in their driveway, his hulking figure a steady presence around their modest home. He arrived early one morning, tools in hand, to tackle their broken fence, a project Arya had been putting off since Caleb's passing. "Don't need to do this," Arya protested weakly, watching him examine the sagging boards. Tank looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ma'am, your husband would have wanted this fixed proper." His voice was gruff but gentle. "Besides, can't have Hazel living with a broken fence." The steady rhythm of his hammer became a comforting soundtrack to their mornings. Neighbors who had initially peered anxiously through their curtains gradually emerged to wave hello, their fear of the ex-Hell's Angel softening as they watched him work. On Wednesday afternoon, Tank spotted Arya struggling with grocery bags as he finished the last section of fence. Without a word, he crossed the street and lifted all 6 bags effortlessly. "Let me help you with those, Mrs. Porter." "Arya," she corrected him, a small smile playing at her lips. "After all you've done, I think we're past formalities." Inside, as they unpacked groceries together, Hazel watched from the doorway, amazed at how natural it felt. This giant of a man carefully arranging cans in their cupboard, asking where things belonged. It was like having a protective older brother, something she'd never known she needed until now. Later that week, Tank's Harley rumbled to a stop in front of the old youth center on Maple Street. The building had been empty for years, its windows dusty and dark, playground equipment rusted from a neglect. He stood there for a long while, studying the faded sign and crumbling steps. "What are you thinking?" Hazel asked, having followed him on her bicycle. "I'm thinking about second chances," Tank replied, his eyes distant. "This place, it could mean something again. Your kindness got me thinking. Maybe it's time we all did something good for this town." The next day, a dozen motorcycles lined the youth center's parking lot. Bikers in leather jackets wielded paintbrushes and power tools, their rough laughter echoing across the playground as they worked. Children from the neighborhood gathered to watch, wide-eyed, as these intimidating men transformed their scary appearances into something almost magical. "Hey kids," Tank called out, paint splattered across his jacket. "Want to help us pick colors for the mural?" Soon, small hands were pointing excitedly at color swatches, and the wall that had once been covered in graffiti began to bloom with vibrant designs. The mural took shape, a garden of hope growing from concrete, with the words, "Kindness grows here," arching over the top. Word spread through town. More volunteers appeared each day, not just bikers now, but local painters, carpenters, and families wanting to help. The playground equipment was repaired and repainted. Someone donated basketball hoops. The interior was cleaned, painted, and furnished with donated items. Through it all, Hazel was there, bringing water to the workers, organizing supply runs, and slowly finding her voice. One quiet afternoon, as Tank replaced rotting floorboards, she brought out her father's old guitar, the one she'd been too shy to play in public before. Settling onto a newly painted bench, she began to strum softly. The song was one her father had taught her, about hope and new beginnings. Her voice, though hesitant at first, grew stronger with each verse. Tank paused his work, sitting silently in the doorway, listening. When she finished, she noticed moisture in his eyes, though he quickly looked away. "Your dad taught you that?" he asked gruffly. Hazel nodded. "He always said music was a way to share your heart without words." Tank was quiet for a moment. He was right. "Keep playing, kid. This place needs your music." That evening, as Arya and Hazel sat on their porch watching the sunset, a transformation was visible in both of them. Hazel sat straighter, smiled more easily. Arya's worried frown had softened into something more peaceful. "You know," Arya said, watching Tank's motorcycle disappear down their street, "I was so wrong about him, about all of this." She reached for Hazel's hand. "When your father passed, I thought we had to face everything alone. I was so focused on protecting you that I forgot sometimes protection comes in unexpected packages." Hazel squeezed her mother's hand. "Like angels with tattoos instead of wings?" Arya laughed softly. "Maybe God does send angels, just not the kind with wings. Sometimes they come on Harleys, teaching us that grace can wear leather and kindness can look fierce." As darkness settled over their town, Hazel could see the youth center from their porch, lights glowing warmly through fresh-cleaned windows, the new sign catching the last rays of sunset. Where there had once been darkness and decay, now there was life and possibility. She smiled, watching those lights shine like beacons in the growing dusk. Her simple act of sharing a sandwich had sparked something larger than herself, a chain reaction of kindness that was transforming not just a building, but an entire community's heart. The youth center's lights glowed steadily in the distance, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could light up the darkest places, bringing hope back to corners where it had long been forgotten. The morning sun had barely risen when Channel 5 News broke the story that would shatter the town's fragile peace. Arya was serving coffee at the diner when the TV above the counter flickered with breaking news. Dangerous ex-convict infiltrates local community. The headline blazed across the screen. The camera zoomed in on Tank's face, caught in an unflattering angle as he worked at the youth center. The reporter's voice dripped with manufactured concern. Tank Johnson, former leader of the notorious Steel Riders motorcycle gang, has embedded himself in our peaceful community under the guise of charity work. But sources reveal a violent past, including multiple arrests and suspected ties to organized crime. The coffee pot trembled in Aria's hand. Her regular customers, who had just days ago praised the youth center's renovation, now whispered and stared at their phones. She hurried to the break room, fingers shaking as she dialed Hazel's number. At Fairview High, the atmosphere had already shifted. Hazel walked through halls that buzzed with renewed gossip. Madison Wheeler, who had tormented her for years, suddenly appeared at her locker with a sugary smile. "Oh my gosh, Hazel, we should totally hang out sometime. I mean, you're basically famous now." Madison flipped her perfectly styled hair. "And those bikers? So edgy and cool." Hazel's stomach churned. "You've never wanted to hang out before." "Don't be like that. People change." Madison's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, my dad's running for city council. He'd love to meet your unique friends." Down the hall, Hazel's former lunch table companions watched with narrowed eyes. During third period, a crumpled note landed on her desk. "Fame really changed you. Guess you think you're too good for us now?" The day grew heavier with each passing hour. In the cafeteria, conversations hushed when she walked by, only to explode into whispers once she passed. Her phone buzzed constantly with friend requests from strangers and messages from local reporters seeking interviews. After school, Hazel found Tank waiting in his usual spot, ready to walk her home. But today, 2 police cruisers idled nearby, their officers watching intently. "Don't let it bother you, kid," Tank said quietly, noticing her distress. "Been dealing with those looks my whole life." At home, they found Aria pacing the living room. "Tank, we need to talk." Her voice was strained. "The town council called an emergency meeting. They're saying you're a threat to public safety." Tank's weathered face grew still. He sank into their old armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 44 years. "Guess it was bound to come out sooner or later." He rubbed his face with calloused hands. "Your mom deserves the truth, Hazel. Both of you do." The story spilled out in his gravelly voice. 10 years ago, he'd led the Steel Riders, a rival gang known for their brutal turf wars. His wife, Sarah, had been his anchor to humanity. "She kept telling me I was better than the life I was living. I just agreed to leave it all behind when—" His voice cracked. "Drunk driver. Hit her bike head on. After that, I walked away from everything. The gang, the violence. Found God in a prison chapel." Aria sat quietly, her hands clasped tight. "Why come here?" "Wasn't planning to stay. Just passing through, looking for work. Then your daughter—" He looked at Hazel with fierce pride. "She showed me kindness when I was at my lowest. Reminded me of Sarah. Same gentle spirit." "But now they're trying to drive you away," Hazel said, fighting tears. "Maybe they're right." Tank stood heavily. "My past could hurt your future, kid. Everything you've built here." "No." Hazel's voice was stronger than she felt. "You taught me that kindness means standing by people even when it's hard." A police siren wailed in the distance. Tank moved to the window, his expression darkening. "Problem is, the past has a way of following you." That night, Hazel couldn't sleep. The street lamp cast strange shadows through her curtains. Around midnight, the low rumble of motorcycles drew her to the window. Her heart stumbled. These weren't Tank's friends. 5 bikes idled across the street, their riders watching the house. Their leather cuts bore a different insignia, a steel fist crushing a skull. One rider looked up, catching her eye. Even from a distance, his cold smile made her shiver. She recognized the patch on his jacket from Tank's story. The Steel Riders had come to Fairview. Hazel backed away from the window, her phone already in hand to text Tank. The sound of motorcycles grew louder as more bikes joined the first group. The shadows of her past tormentors at school now seemed trivial compared to these new, more dangerous shadows gathering in the night. Through her window, she could hear their engines growling like hungry beasts, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. The Steel Riders' presence was a clear message. The peaceful transformation Tank had begun was about to face its greatest test. "Mom," Hazel called out softly, her voice trembling. "Mom, you need to see this." The gentle tick of the hallway clock counted out the seconds as both mother and daughter watched the growing number of unfamiliar bikes line their once quiet street. Each passing moment brought more riders, their intentions as dark as the leather they wore. The safety they had found in Tank's protection now felt fragile, threatened by the ghosts of his former life that refused to stay buried. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings through Fairview. The restored youth center stood proud against the blue Kansas sky, its walls now adorned with colorful murals of children playing. The parking lot filled early with families arriving for the Chariati event, their chatter mixing with the occasional rumble of motorcycles as Tank's friends helped direct traffic. Hazel stood backstage in the newly renovated assembly hall, her hands trembling as she held her father's old guitar. She wore a flowing blue dress that Aria had helped her choose, and for once, she didn't try to hide behind oversized clothes. The past few weeks had changed something in her. "You ready, kid?" Tank's deep voice came from behind her. He looked different today. Clean-shaven, wearing a pressed button-down shirt instead of his usual leather jacket. "I'm scared," Hazel admitted, plucking nervously at the guitar strings. "What if they don't like the song?" Tank's weathered face softened. "That song came from your heart. Same place that kindness of yours comes from. That's all that matters." The assembly hall filled quickly. Hazel peeked through the curtain, spotting her mom in the front row. Aria's eyes were already misty with pride. Next to her sat several of Tank's biker friends, their usual intimidating appearance softened by gentle smiles and Sunday clothes. The mayor spoke first, praising the community's effort in restoring the youth center. Though his words were diplomatic, he carefully avoided mentioning Tank or the bikers' contribution. Hazel felt her heart sink a little at the obvious slight. Finally, it was her turn. Walking onto the stage felt like moving through water. The lights were bright, the crowd a blur of faces. Hazel settled onto the wooden stool, adjusted her microphone, and took a deep breath. "This song is called 'Grace is Heavier Than Hate,'" she said softly. "I wrote it for someone who taught me that everyone deserves a second chance." Her fingers found the opening chord, and she began to sing. The melody was simple but haunting, carried by her clear, pure voice. "Behind the scars and steel, there's a heart that longs to heal. Your judgment weighs like stone, but grace can lift us home." As she sang, something extraordinary happened. The room grew completely still. She saw tears rolling down cheeks, hands clasped together in prayer. Even the mayor dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. In the second verse, several of Tank's biker friends joined in humming the harmony, their deep voices adding a powerful undercurrent to Hazel's gentle melody. The sound filled the hall like a prayer. When the last note faded, There was a moment of perfect silence. Then the applause began, building into a standing ovation. Arya was openly crying now, and even some of the toughest-looking bikers wiped at their eyes. Tank stepped onto the stage, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to thank this young lady," he said, gesturing to Hazel. When everyone else saw a broken-down biker, she saw the man behind the tattoos. Her kindness didn't just change my life. It changed this whole town. The celebration continued into the evening. Children played on the new playground equipment, while parents chatted with bikers about motorcycle maintenance and family recipes. It seemed for a few precious hours that Fairview had found its way to true unity. Hazel and Arya left around 8 o'clock, tired but happy. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as they drove home. They were halfway there when the first siren split the air. "Mom, look!" Hazel pointed out the window. An orange glow lit up the darkening sky behind them. More sirens joined the first, their wailing growing urgent. Arya made a U-turn, her hands tight on the steering wheel. As they approached the youth center, their hearts sank. Flames leaped from the roof, devouring the building they'd worked so hard to restore. Fire trucks surrounded the structure, their lights casting red shadows across the gathering crowd. Tank was already there, his nice shirt covered in soot as he helped firefighters drag hoses closer to the blaze. His face was grimy with ash and desperate determination. "The children's art supplies," he kept saying. "We've got to save the children's art supplies." But before he could make another attempt to enter the building, 2 police cars screeched into the parking lot. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn. "Tank Johnson," one shouted. "Step away from the building and put your hands where we can see them." "What?" Hazel stepped forward. "No, he's trying to help." "Stay back, miss," an officer warned. "We have multiple witnesses who saw him near the building just before the fire started." "That's because he was locking up," Hazel cried. "He's been taking care of this place for weeks." But her protests fell on deaf ears. They handcuffed Tank, who didn't resist. He only looked at Hazel with sad eyes as they led him to the police car. "It's okay, kid," he said quietly as they pushed him into the back seat. "Sometimes the world isn't ready for change." The crowd that had celebrated Unity hours before now muttered darkly about "knew it all along," and once a criminal, always a criminal. Hazel watched in horror as her world crumbled as surely as the burning building before her. The youth center's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. All their work, all their hopes for change, seemed to be turning to ash before their eyes. Arya wrapped her arms around Hazel, who stood trembling in the firelight. The flames reflected in her tears as she whispered, "God, don't let my kindness end in ashes." The fire raged on, consuming not just the building but the fragile trust they'd built. The night air filled with smoke and sirens, and the cruel whispers of those who'd been waiting for Tank to fail. In the distance, a police car's lights faded into the darkness, carrying away the man who'd become their unlikely guardian angel. The morning after the fire, a fine gray ash drifted through the air like dirty snow. Hazel stood on her front porch, scrubbing at angry red letters that screamed "Traitor's Girl" across the white paint. Her arms ached, but the spray paint barely faded. "Honey, let me help with that," Arya said, coming outside with another bucket of soapy water. Dark circles ringed her eyes from a sleepless night. "It won't come off," Hazel whispered, her voice breaking. She dropped the brush, soap suds splashing her shoes. A news van crept past their house for the 3rd time that morning, camera lens pointing their way like an accusing eye. Hazel ducked behind a porch column, her heart hammering. "I can't do this, Mom. I can't go to school today." Her hands shook as she hugged herself. "Everyone will think Tank did it. They'll think I helped him somehow." Arya set down her bucket and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "It's okay. You can stay home today." She tried to sound strong, but Hazel felt her mother's trembling. Inside, they closed all the curtains. The phone kept ringing, reporters wanting statements, neighbors offering unwanted opinions, anonymous callers breathing threats. Arya finally unplugged it. Later that afternoon, while her mother was making tea, Hazel found some paper and began to write. "Dear Tank, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't given you that sandwich, if I hadn't brought all this attention—" She crossed it out and started again. "Dear Tank, I believe in you. I know you didn't do this. God knows too. Remember what you told me about second chances? Well, I'm not giving up on yours." Days crawled by. More letters piled up, some tear-stained, some filled with prayers, all carrying her unwavering faith in Tank's innocence. Arya watched her daughter with worried eyes as bill notices started arriving. The diner had cut her hours, claiming current circumstances. On the fourth day, Hazel looked up from her latest letter, determination hardening in her eyes. "Mom, I need to go to the police station." "Honey, I don't think they have the wrong person. Someone has to tell them." Arya studied her daughter's face, the same quiet strength she'd seen in Hazel's father before he passed. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll drive you." The police station was a small brick building with American flags flanking the entrance. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed as Hazel approached the front desk. "I need to speak with Sheriff Calhoun," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's about Tank Johnson." The deputy started to dismiss her, but Sheriff Calhoun emerged from his office, coffee cup in hand. His weathered face softened slightly at the sight of her. "Come on in, Miss Porter." In his office, surrounded by filing cabinets and the smell of stale coffee, Hazel spoke from her heart. She told him about Tank fixing their fence, about his gentle way with the children at the youth center, about his promise to leave his past behind. "Sir, he was rebuilding his life. Why would he destroy something he worked so hard to create?" Sheriff Calhoun leaned back in his chair, studying her. "We have witnesses who saw him near the building before the fire. Because he always locks up at night. He checks every door, every window. He cares about that place." The sheriff's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You seem mighty sure about him." "I am." Hazel met his gaze steadily. "The same way I was sure about giving him my sandwich that first day. Sometimes God lets you see people the way he sees them." Something shifted in Sheriff Calhoun's expression. He picked up a file from his desk, flipping through it slowly. "You know, our evidence is mostly circumstantial. A lot of folks wanting to point fingers, but not much solid proof." Hope fluttered in Hazel's chest. "Will you at least look deeper, please?" The sheriff nodded slowly. "I'll review everything again. Can't promise more than that." As they left the station, Arya squeezed Hazel's hand. "I'm proud of you, baby. Standing up for what you believe in. That takes real courage." Hazel looked back at the station, her jaw set with determination. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "I won't let Tank's story end this way. God didn't bring him into our lives just to abandon him now." The ash had finally settled, but Hazel's spirit was rising. She would fight for Tank the way he had fought for her, with unwavering faith and the courage to face whatever came next. 2 days after her visit to the sheriff's office, Hazel sat in her bedroom, hands trembling as she positioned her phone on a stack of books. She took a deep breath, pressed record, and began to speak. "Hi, my name is Hazel Porter. You might know me as the girl who gave her lunch to a biker, or maybe as the girl who brought trouble to Fairview." She wiped away a tear. "But I want to tell you about the man I know, Tank Johnson. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. He's the man who fixed our broken fence without being asked, who spent weeks rebuilding our youth center with his own hands, who taught little kids how to paint murals and showed them that second chances are real. Tears flowed freely now, but she didn't try to hide them. Someone burned down our youth center, and they're blaming Tank. But the Tank I know would never destroy something that gave hope to children. He wouldn't tear down what he worked so hard to build up. She held up the chrome bracelet he'd given her. This was his thank you for one simple sandwich. That's who Tank really is. Someone who repays kindness with greater kindness. Please, help me show the truth. Help me fight for the man who fought for me. Within hours of posting, the video spread like wildfire. The hashtag #ChomarkGraceGuard exploded across social media platforms. Comments poured in from across the country. This girl's courage is changing hearts. On my way to Fairview, time to rebuild. True faith in action. Count me in. By noon the next day, the rumble of motorcycles filled the streets again. This time, they came with tools and building materials strapped to their bikes. Bikers from Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, some riding hundreds of miles to help. The town's reaction surprised everyone. Mr. Henderson from the hardware store donated lumber. The high school shop class offered their skills. Even Jessica Miller, who had once shared the cruel video mocking Hazel, showed up with her parents carrying boxes of nails and paint. Aria transformed the diner into mission control. She organized shifts, coordinated donations, and kept everyone fed. The small kitchen buzzed with volunteers making sandwiches and filling thermoses with coffee. Her eyes sparkled with pride, watching Hazel move confidently through the crowds, directing teams and thanking helpers. "Look at her go," whispered Mrs. Chen, a regular customer who'd brought 3 casseroles. "She's not hiding anymore." Aria nodded, throat tight with emotion. She found her purpose. Hazel worked tirelessly, her oversized sweater now stained with paint and sawdust. She helped carry boards, held ladders steady, and shared her vision for new murals. When her old anxiety crept in, she touched Tank's bracelet and remembered his words. Kindness costs nothing but builds everything. As the sun began to set, Hazel climbed onto a stack of pallets to address the gathered crowd. Hundreds of headlights illuminated her from behind, creating a gentle glow around her figure. "Thank you all for believing in second chances," she called out, her voice carrying across the construction site. "Thank you for showing that love really does echo louder than hate." The bikers revved their engines in response, not in threat this time, but in celebration. The sound rolled across Fairview like thunder, but now it carried hope instead of fear. Standing beside her mother, watching the sunset paint the sky in fierce oranges and pinks, Hazel felt something shift inside her. The girl who once tried to disappear had found her voice. The kindness she'd offered in secret had returned 100-fold, bringing with it a family she never expected, one bound not by blood, but by grace. The horizon glowed with motorcycle headlights, each one a beacon of hope, each rider a testament to the power of seeing past appearances to the heart beneath. In that moment, Hazel understood that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness, like Shariang, a simple sandwich on a rainy morning. 5 days after the video went viral, Detective Sarah Miller burst into the police station, clutching a USB drive. Security footage from a gas station 3 miles from the youth center showed 3 men in rival gang colors filling gas cans the night of the fire. One of them, racked with guilt after seeing Hazel's plea, had come forward. "I couldn't take it anymore," the gang member confessed through tears. "Watching that girl fight for Tank, knowing we did this to hurt him, it wasn't right." Word spread through Fairview like lightning. By 10 o'clock that morning, hundreds gathered outside the courthouse. Tank emerged into the bright sunlight, squinting at the crowd. His leather jacket, creased from days in lockup, hung loose on his frame. Hazel pushed through the sea of people, her heart pounding. "Tank!" she called out, voice breaking. The big man's eyes filled with tears as she ran to him. He wrapped her in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. "You never stopped believing in me, kid," he whispered hoarsely. Cameras flashed and reporters thrust microphones forward, but for that moment they were in their own world, the gentle giant and the girl who saw his heart. Mayor Ellen Briggs approached them, her usual polished demeanor softened by humility. "Mr. Johnson," she said, clarion her throat. "Tank, I owe you and Hazel a public apology. I let fear cloud my judgment, and I was wrong." The mayor turned to address the gathered crowd and news cameras. The rebuilt facility will be named the Grace House, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage of a young girl who dared to show kindness when others showed hate. That evening, as the sun painted the Kansas sky in deep purple and gold, the rumble began. Motorcycles, hundreds, then thousands, lined up along Main Street. Tank sat astride his gleaming Harley, Hazel securely behind him. She had traded her oversized sweater for a leather jacket borrowed from one of the female riders. "Ready?" Tank asked over his shoulder. Hazel tightened her grip around his waist and nodded. The convoy roared to life. Force, the largest gathering of bikers in Kansas history. They rode through Fairview not as outlaws or outcasts, but as brothers and sisters united by grace. The wind whipped through Hazel's hair as they led the procession. The sound of so many engines moving in harmony reminded her of the hymns she used to sing in church. A different kind of worship, perhaps, but holy in its own way. Looking at the faces lining the streets, she saw not fear, but wonder. The rumble of motorcycles had become a song of healing, of unity, of broken things made whole again. Gone was the girl who had once tried to hide from the world. In her place rode someone who had found her strength in gentleness, her voice in kindness, and her family in the most unexpected places. 3 months after the historic ride, autumn painted Fairview in warm colors. The Grace House had become the heart of the community, its walls echoing with laughter and hope. Every afternoon, troubled teens found sanctuary there, sharing stories over hot chocolate while learning motorcycle maintenance from reformed bikers. Hazel Porter stood at a podium in Fairview High School's auditorium, her voice strong and clear. "Kindness isn't weakness," she told the silent crowd. "Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." Gone were her oversized sweaters and nervous smiles. She carried herself with quiet confidence now, touching hearts across Kansas as she shared her story of faith and transformation. Tank Johnson, his leather jacket now bearing a Grace House mentor patch, worked with young riders in the garage behind the center. His gentle guidance turned potential rebels into community leaders. "There's power in those engines," he'd tell them, "but real strength comes from using that power for good." At home one evening, Aria watched from the kitchen as Hazel sat at their worn dining table, pen moving across paper. "Dear Dad," the letter began, "I wish you could see how your lessons about kindness changed everything. Remember how you always said one small light can pierce the darkest night? Well, that little flame sparked a wildfire of grace." Hazel paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. Through the window, she heard the familiar rumble of motorcycles. Setting down her pen, she stepped onto the porch into the golden sunset. Hundreds of bikes cruised past their house, not in protest or protection now, but in celebration of what they'd become. Their engines created a symphony of belonging, a reminder that grace could transform even the roughest hearts. The sound drifted through Fairview like a gentle benediction, carrying with it the promise that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a simple act of kindness. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.